Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all really well. Today I'm going to be doing a video on something slightly different. It's not the kind of thing that I normally talk about. It's something that I suffer from myself and I have spoken about on this channel, but I haven't actually touched upon it recently. I know that lots of you actually found me initially because of this certain thing, and so I do think it's important to keep the conversation going and also to share with you my story, my journey, any updates. So the thing that I want to talk to you about today is IBS, which if you don't know about it already, then lucky you for one. It is an umbrella term that is used to describe a whole host of symptoms including diarrhea, constipation, bloating, gas, abdominal pain, a lot of fatigue, not being able to eat certain foods, and a general dysfunction of the digestive system. There's no cure for IBS and it's still quite a fairly misunderstood condition, so I do really think it's important to talk about it, to share my story, because when I was first diagnosed when I was 14, there really wasn't that much help online, and there definitely wasn't anyone that sat down talking into a camera sharing their experiences. It was a very kind of faceless, nameless condition, and it's largely still deemed quite embarrassing. I feel privileged that I have a platform to be able to share my story and to talk about it, and hopefully in turn that will help at least one person. So I just wanted to share my story, share my tips, and hopefully provide some support for any of you guys that feel quite alone going through this, or you've just been diagnosed and you're not sure what to expect or where to even start, because it can be a bit of a minefield when you're looking into IBS remedies and solutions. But I have 10 years of trial and error, so I am here to share with you my story, my tips, tricks, and everything in between. To save me from waffling on, because I do like to waffle, let's face it, I have broken down the tips today into 5 different sections. You couldn't see that, but I was showing 5 fingers. There are different types of IBS, so there's IBS-C and IBS-D, which you might have heard of, and each of those terms basically is in reference to your main symptoms. For me personally, I have a mix of diarrhea and constipation. It's a great recipe. So I'm a real bundle of laughs, don't you worry. But lots of these things I have tried myself and they do work. I do now consider myself someone who still has IBS, but it doesn't affect me on a daily basis. And going from somebody who 3 years ago couldn't get out of bed because I was in so much pain, I couldn't leave being next to the bathroom basically because I was too scared to go out and worry about where the nearest toilet was, to now where I'm running my own business, I'm able to fly all over the world and travel and host events and do amazing things that I'd never dreamt of doing. But following these 5 easy steps, I promise you will start to get a hold of it and not let IBS overwhelm your life. So I'm already doing what I said I wouldn't do, which is waffling, so I'm going to get to point number 1, which is easing anxiety. Now for me, anxiety can be a massive trigger. I know that if I've got an important meeting or an important event, I start getting the gurgling butterflies in my stomach sensation that I'm sure is natural and normal for all of us. Having a little bit of anxiety is natural, it's normal, it's great, it means you care, it means you're conscientious, and it means you're hardworking. Anxiety is not a bad thing, and we definitely don't want to get rid of it altogether. But I know that sometimes the symptoms of IBS mean that anxiety can be caused around worrying about when you're going to have a flare-up, which invariably then causes a flare-up. So it's a bit of a catch-22, it's a bit of a tricky one. It took me about 8 years to realise my anxiety was really triggering off my IBS, and anytime I was in a situation where I felt like I couldn't easily excuse myself or get out of or escape from to go to the loo, I would start getting this huge overwhelming build-up of anxiety and emotion and panic basically. This eventually manifested into a full-blown anxiety disorder, and I used to suffer from panic attacks. I still have them occasionally, although they are very infrequent. I'd say maybe 1 a year, if that. One thing I would highly recommend if you find that anxiety is also a trigger for you is something called CBT, which stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. If you're in the UK, you can apply to get this on the NHS, which is what I did, but you can also obviously go privately as well. And I found it was really helpful for channeling my thoughts in a different direction. So as soon as I started to feel that anxiety and that panic manifest and build up inside me. It's about channeling those thoughts in a different direction, not to immediately think, oh goodness, my IBS is going to flare up and this is going to happen and this is going to happen. It's all about changing your thought patterns and invariably leading those thought patterns into healthier, happier ones. Obviously, I'm not an expert and I'm definitely not a trained CBT therapist. I'm not a doctor. This is all just my personal story, my personal experiences, and hopefully they might help you, but I'm not an expert, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professional, just to add that in there. Now, tip number 2, no pun intended there, is to add magnesium into your diet. Now, this is going to be slightly different depending on whether you suffer from diarrhea and constipation, but if you're anything like me and you kind of have a bit of both, then constipation can be one of those very, very annoying things. And it kind of works in tandem with bloating, because often I can be so bloated. I have to buy clothes in varying different sizes because I never know how bloated I'm going to be, and obviously you don't want something tight over your stomach. At one point, at my worst, I pretty much could have passed for about 5 months pregnant. It was that bad. In fact, the longest time I ever didn't go to the toilet, just to provide a bit of context to the word constipation for me, it was 2 weeks, which was hell on earth, let me tell you. Apologies if this is TMI, to be honest, although let's face it, nothing is TMI in this video or in the comments, so don't worry about that. But it can be not only really uncomfortable, but it can completely overwhelm your day, and it just made me feel like utter rubbish. So one thing you can do to relieve this is to incorporate magnesium into your diet. And one thing I use to do this is I use a product called Blackstrap Molasses. I've actually got it here for reference, and I am working with them on this video, but I wouldn't recommend anything to you guys that I hadn't tried out myself and that had helped me personally. Now, I've done a lot of research on molasses, and they're amazing for a whole host of things, including skin, hair and nails, sleep. They have so many benefits that I had absolutely no idea about. But one of the things that they really help with, because of the high levels of magnesium in the product, is relieving constipation and regulating your digestive system. It really helps to get things going and just leaves you feeling back to your normal self, which is what we all want, let's face it. So you basically take 1 to 2 tablespoons of the Blackstrap Molasses, you stir it into some warm water, and then you drink it in the morning. And this helps to relieve any constipation that you might be suffering from. It's a natural laxative, so it's going to be quite gentle. It's not going to leave you sitting on the loo for an hour within the hour, and it really helps to regulate things so that you know you're going to go to the loo and you can get on with the rest of your day. I also find for me that it really helps to soothe my digestive system and leave me feeling like my best self, which is all I can ask. It's also really high in iron, which I find is great because unfortunately my crazy digestive system means that I don't absorb a lot of iron from my food, so I do have to get it elsewhere. And it's also really high in potassium, so that's 3 things that you're getting from this natural supplement. It's really easy to weave into your daily routine.
The brand that I use is Plantation Blackstrap Molasses, which you can find at your local Whole Foods, from grocery stores, and you can also buy online from Amazon. I'll leave a little link in the description in case you fancy checking it out for yourself. As mentioned, I stir in 1 tablespoon of Blackstrap Molasses every day into a cup of water. I usually wait for the kettle to cool down so it's not too hot. Each tablespoon provides you with 20% of your daily value of calcium, 20% of your daily value of iron, and 17% of your daily value of potassium. Some women also use it to relieve symptoms of PMS because it's so high in iron. Blackstrap is actually a byproduct of regular cane sugar. Once the sweetness has gone, what is left is this nutrient-rich byproduct. It's also known to improve skin clarity and hair health, so it defrizzes and makes your hair much smoother. It can also help with things like anemia, and then obviously with IBS as well.
Tip number 3 is to find your trigger foods. Now, this is going to be different for everyone, and it can be quite a long process to find out what works for you and what doesn't. I actually had an intolerance test done a few years ago, and I found that was really helpful to figure out initially what was causing me a lot of discomfort. I immediately cut out dairy and eggs from my diet, but I now don't eat gluten, soy or yeast either, because I do find that those irritate my gut lining and just cause me a lot of wind and bloating and all those other lovely things. One thing that I know a lot of nutritionists and doctors recommend is the low FODMAP diet. This is a very restrictive diet, but it basically helps decipher what is going on in your body. You reintroduce the food slowly, and then you can see what reaction it causes. That's a very brief, succinct overview of the low FODMAP. Obviously, please go and do your own research. I haven't personally tried it, but I know there's been a lot of success stories, and you cut out things like onion and garlic, foods that are very high in FODMAP and can cause a lot of discomfort. I would highly recommend keeping a food diary whilst you're figuring out your trigger foods, because often it can be easy to overlook what you've had during the day. But if you record your food, your intake of food, and also your symptoms every single day, you will start to notice patterns. And that was one thing that I did that I found really, really helpful in eliminating what was causing me stress in the tummy area. Tip number 4 is to make sure you're getting enough fibre. Now, this is going to be different again depending on whether you have constipation or diarrhea. The magnesium in the blackstrap molasses really will help with that, and it really will help get things going. But you also need to make sure that you're having the right amount of fibre. It's going to be different from person to person. It also depends on what you eat during the day, your metabolism, various different things. It's kind of a trial and error, but I have found that as long as I have quite a big portion of fibre for breakfast, then I'm usually fine. It's also worth noting that there are different types of fibre. There is non-soluble fibre and soluble fibre. It's worth researching these yourself because they can have different effects on your body, but one thing that I found worked really well for me was to make sure that I had the fibre at the same time of the day every day. So I got myself into a really strict routine where I'd wake up in the morning, I'd have a peppermint tea, which really helps to soothe digestion and any kind of wind spasms, etc. I'd also then have a big bowl of porridge in the morning at the same time every morning, and then I would go to the toilet about half an hour later. I found that having this really strict routine every morning helped my body to adjust and to get used to it, and that actually really helped me in the early days to regain some sort of control over my body, because I think that's the one thing about IBS. You do feel a little bit out of control of your own body, and that can be really scary. It can be quite anxiety inducing, and it can also be quite isolating because you don't know where you stand, what you should be doing, what you can and can't do. So I did find that setting that really strict routine for myself helped immensely in regaining some of that control over my IBS and getting my body used to fibre, used to the same amount of fibre, and used to going to the loo at the same time every day. Tip number 5 is to talk about it and to be kind to yourself. I think one of the things about IBS, especially in the initial days when I was diagnosed, was that nobody spoke about it. It was a really embarrassing, taboo subject. I only ever spoke to my mum about it, I remember in the early days. I would never speak to a friend about it, and I didn't know who to go to for advice other than my doctor and my mum. And don't get me wrong, my mum was amazing and I had her shoulder to cry on and lean on whenever I needed it to. But I do think that since I started talking about it about 4 years ago, it's been so therapeutic for me, but it's also helped me to relieve some of that embarrassment and that anxiety-inducing kind of feel that you're keeping some sort of secret to yourself. You don't need to feel alone in this. There are lots of people going through it, and in fact, since I started talking about it, there are so many people that come up to me at events, people that I'm friends with, people in general, that tell me that they have the same thing. And for me, that's immensely helpful because I know that I'm not just here on my own going through it. There are other people that go through it too. I think often the symptoms of IBS can be deemed as quite trivial. I know in the past I have morbidly wished that they would just diagnose me with something else so that they could give me a cure or we could figure out some plan of action. But time and time again, every single test that I've had, it's come back. It's just IBS, and that just kind of trivializes it. It makes you feel like you're making a big deal out of nothing, but IBS can be really debilitating and really isolating, as I said. For people that have never had an IBS flare-up before, the only way I can really explain it is to imagine your worst ever bout of food poisoning and basically imagine having that 24/7. Sometimes, obviously, as I said, if you're more prone to the constipation symptoms, which sometimes I am, then it can be the opposite and you can just feel like a walking bloated beach ball. It can feel like you're literally holding a basketball in your stomach. and that can be equally as frustrating because you don't feel your normal self. Often it's accompanied by lots of abdominal pain, and I used to get pains that would wake me up in the middle of the night and I couldn't get back to sleep because it was so painful. So obviously this would make me very, very tired, and I just didn't feel like I was living the life that a 21-year-old should. I'm now 24 and I do feel like I'm living the life that I should, and there are lots of things that I have made adjustments to, small tweaks, big lifestyle changes, but I do feel, as I said before, like I've regained control over my IBS, I've regained control over my body, and it certainly doesn't affect me on a day-to-day basis. Do be kind to yourself because flare-ups do happen. Occasionally I get them and it's not your fault. Maybe it's a stressful time, maybe you're thinking about something, maybe you've got a big project on. There are lots of things that could cause a slight IBS flare-up, but you do have to be kind to yourself and not punish yourself, because I know I went through a stage where I would punish myself whenever I did have an IBS flare-up, and it just really didn't help the situation at all. So be kind to yourself, and obviously be kind to others as well, because they could be going through the same thing, or they could be going through a whole host of different issues, symptoms, health conditions that we know nothing about. IBS is an invisible illness, which I think is why it's sometimes hard for people to understand how much it's affecting us internally. But I promise that there are things that you can do to feel better, and you will feel better in time. It's all about trial and error. Unfortunately, there's no one size fits all solution. I wish there was. I wish I could invent it. But I do have lots of videos on the subject of things that I eat on a day-to-day basis, tips, how I travel the world with IBS. I will link every single video that I've done on IBS below in case you fancy checking it out. Hopefully this video has been really helpful and you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon on the next video.